There are so many legal challenges as we all face the coronavirus epidemic, and we've tried to answer many of them over the last few weeks during this newscast on KKTV. Joining me now by Skype once again is local attorney David McDivitt from McDivitt Law Firm. David, I want to talk about some employment issues first. The governor recommends we all wear masks outside of our homes to protect others if we're sick from the virus. So can my boss require that I wear a mask?
Great question, Diane. Yes, they can require that you wear a mask. There is a requirement, though, that they provide you with the mask or reimburse you for the cost of the mask. Obvious issue is, obviously masks are hard to come by right now, but your employer can require that you wear a mask at work.
What about checking my temperature when I get to work?
Yes, the guidelines changed several weeks ago. EEOC and the CDC now both permit employers to do temperature checks of their employees when they come into work.
Okay. Can businesses be held liable if they don't ask employees in public places like grocery stores or Costco to wear masks?
Theoretically, they might be. I don't think that's a really strong claim. I mean, the CDC has issued guidelines and advisories, and they each carry different weight. Right now, what they're saying about the requirement to do that is not as strong as what they've said in the past about how a business is supposed to respond in the face of a positive diagnosis of somebody in the workplace or at one of their facilities. So right now, while somebody could make a claim, I don't think it's a strong claim.
Okay. All right. When we come back, David is going to talk about some legal moves parents of children will want to think about before, God forbid, of course, you came down with the virus. Plus, do healthcare workers have a legal recourse if they're exposed? We'll be right back with those answers. Welcome back. Local attorney David McDivitt is back with me now, helping to answer some legal questions about coronavirus today. So, David, I'm curious, what legal recourse will healthcare workers have if they are exposed, which we know they're exposed, of our doctors and nurses and everyone?
Yeah, you bet. And that's a good question. And there are two avenues really right now. In the traditional workers' compensation scheme in Colorado, anybody who contracts an infectious disease while in the workplace might have a claim for workers' compensation benefits. Now, they have to prove, and healthcare workers are no different if they want to actually make a work comp claim for exposure. There is a standard that they have to meet, as any employee would, to show that they contracted that virus in the course and scope of their employment. There is a new carve-out, for example, that Pinnacle Assurance, one of the largest providers of work comp benefits in Colorado, has just instituted, and it's a wage replacement scheme directly for these first responders and these healthcare workers, so that if they are required to quarantine because of exposure, even in the absence yet of a positive diagnosis themselves for COVID-19, if they've been exposed to it and they're required to quarantine, they may be entitled for up to 14 days of a wage replacement benefit if they're not getting their wages paid through another source. And that's directly just for first responders and healthcare workers who are the ones that are most likely to be exposed in the course and scope of their employment.
Well, of course, first responders, too. There's a lot of concern in our community about all the interaction that they have with all of us.
Yeah.
Okay. Estate planning, that's something I want to talk about, too. It's something anyone will want to consider right now, especially if you do have young children. So what's the most important step that parents can take right now, David?
I think the number one thing that parents need to do is make sure that they have some kind of guidance in place for what happens if they fall ill and they're incapacitated or, God forbid, they die because of coronavirus or anything, honestly. And that is to have some kind of guardianship outlined in a document that specifies exactly who you want, as your parent, as the parent of the child, who you want to be the guardian for that child. And that can be done in a written document that you put together. You can have it witnessed. That's it. That is number one. The other thing I think people ought to consider doing is having a will in place. Obviously, the best way to do it, to make sure you cover your bases, is to speak to a professional, a lawyer who specializes in estate planning. But if you're just at home and you were desperately worried about this, in Colorado, we allow handwritten wills. As long as you handwrite the whole thing, you don't even need to have it witnessed. Now, if you type any part of it and then you sign it, you do need to have witnesses. But as long as you just handwrite the whole thing and sign it yourself in your own handwriting, that is sufficient.
And you give that to your family members, or where does it go?
Right. Make sure your family members, the people that you want to make sure will be the ones who are administering things when you are either incapacitated or you pass away. And it's certainly the same thing with the guardianship. And you make sure you've let that person know that you have appointed them as the guardian for your child, and make sure that they're okay with that. Because what you don't want is if something happens to you, for your child to be in that state of limbo where the person you've identified as the guardian just doesn't really want to accept that responsibility.
It's a really important conversation. You know, my husband is a first responder. I work in the media. So those are conversations we've already had and taken care of. They're tough to have, but it's so necessary.
Yeah.
All right, David McDivitt, we always appreciate your legal advice. You have been so helpful to us and our viewers at KKTV. Thanks so much.